Special Agent in charge of the Atlanta Regional Office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Mr. Tony Took, Regional Forester of the Southern Region and the U.S. Forest Service. Thank you for being here. Mr. Gordon Meyer, Executive Director of the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. And Major Stephen Adams, who is a law enforcement with the Law Enforcement Division at the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being here. And pursuant to committee rules, we will ask that you all be sworn in, so if you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Again, in order to allow time for discussion and questions as a follow-up, please limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. That your entire written testimony will be made part of the record. And we'll say that before we go to questions, we'll be yielding after your testimony to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, because he's going to have to depart for another engagement. And so, but we'll first go to you, Mr. Santiago, and recognize you for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Meadows, Representative Collins, and Representative Duncan. We are here today to talk about an investigation into illegal activities involving money, chocolate and greed, poachers, and unethical commercial hunting guides in Georgia and North Carolina have reaped financial gains using baiting stations filled with chocolate waste to attract the American black bear for an easy kill during the hunting season. It's an unethical practice, and the service is committed to doing as much as we can with the resources we have to make the illicit take and illegal trade of wildlife such as the black bear as rare as possible. Demand for bear parts such as claws, paws, meat, and gallbladders on the black market is resulting in the rapid decline of the Asian bear populations, and the American black bear is filling the void. Typically, poachers sell bear parts to local buyers who in return sell them to buyers in Asian American markets. The trafficking of bear gallbladder in particular is big business. Used for illegitimate medicinal purposes, the price of a bear gallbladder typically starts between $50 to $200 and can end up being sold several times at prices exceeding $1,000 each. The continued illegal take of the American black bear to meet increased commercial demand for its parts may eventually have a negative impact in its population. As such, the bear is afforded protection under an international treaty known as CITES and the Congressional International Trade on Endangered Species. The American black bear is also protected by the nation's first federal wildlife protection law, the ACI, and state wildlife laws. To facilitate this illicit take, poachers use chocolate bears and make their capture much easier. In this investigation, we saw people bait black bears by using chocolate waste product to fill small culverts known as bait stations. It is unlawful in North Carolina to place processed foods products as bait in any area with an established season for hunting black bears. The people who do this are poachers, not hunters. They are not the hunters conservationists who have led the conservation successes we have seen over the past century and contributed with the hunting and shooting sports industry more than $8.4 billion to help America make America the world's premier conservation leader. Indeed, it was at the behest of citizens and ethical hunters in Tennessee and North Carolina that led to this investigation. Acting on numerous reports of illegal bear hunting in the southern Appalachian Mountains, the service partnered with the Forest Service, Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and North Carolina Wildlife Resources in this joint undercover investigation in 2010. The objective was to establish facts to support the apprehension and prosecution of individuals involved in the unlawful take, possession, sale, purchase, and transport of American black bears. Law enforcement officers infiltrated poaching circles to document violations, including bear baiting and illegal take of bears and other wildlife. The service's role in this investigation focuses on the unlawful take and commercialization of the black bear. 5 individuals were indicted on service-led charges of conspiracy to violate the Lacey Act and a violation of the Lacey Act. Prior to trial, the United States Attorney's Office dismissed charges against 2 of these individuals, one after he pled guilty to a state charge for unlawfully taking a bear, and a second for misappropriation and limited role. Charges against the remaining 3 defendants went to trial, where 2 were convicted and the 3rd individual was acquitted of conspiracy to violate the Lacey Act. The service partnership with state and federal partners in investigations like Operation Something Bruin promotes the sharing of assets and information to investigate the illicit take of wildlife in the most effective way possible. Today, the service has expended less than $10,000 excluding salaries during the investigation. We are hopeful that this small investment in activities to counter illegal poaching makes a long impact that results in increased protection of the black bear. In closing, I would like to commend the citizens and hunters who recognized this unlawful activity was occurring and reported it. They are conservation champions. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Santiago. I missed something. How much did you spend? It was in the latter part of your
$10,000.
$10,000. Okay. Mr. Tooper.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share the Forest Service's involvement in Operation Something Bruin. I've submitted my written testimony for the record, so you've got our official comments. I want to make a few key points about law enforcement operations, their value in public lands, and their value in the management of the national forest. Forest Service manages public lands in 42 states and Puerto Rico. The national forests are some of the most beautiful lands in the world. They provide high-quality wildlife habitat, diverse wildlife and fish populations, forest products, and unsurpassed recreation opportunities. Conservation mission of the Forest Service is recognized worldwide, including right here in western North Carolina. Forest Service manages 2.1 million acres of public land in North Carolina and Georgia. These national forests are some of the most highly visited and treasured landscapes in the nation. These lands and forests exist today because not only visionary leaders from the past, but because of work accomplished every day by land managers and the public working together to conserve this legacy. The Forest Service Law Enforcement Investigation Unit provides support to the managers of these lands by protecting the public and natural resources. They enforce and investigate violations of federal laws, rules, and regulations. These 2 special agents assigned to the National Forest here in North Carolina and Georgia investigate a wide variety of crimes, including damage to natural resources, wildland, arson, illegal drug manufacturing, timber theft, property crimes, archaeological resource protection crimes, and others. Because of the size and the scope of this responsibility, Forest Service law enforcement investigation routinely works collaboratively with other federal, state, and local agencies. And that includes the protection of wildlife on national forests, which is a shared responsibility with the state. We are committed to doing our part to ensure that we have sustainable populations of wildlife for the public to enjoy for generations to come. First and foremost, Operation Something Bruin was about protecting the public's interest. The operation sought to end illegal conduct that denied others access to the benefits from public land. Law-abiding citizens, which include ethical hunters, forest visitors, and anyone else who supports wildlife conservation, all of these deserve access to these rich and valued public resources. Operation Something Bruin was a joint law enforcement operation between federal and state agencies. The Forest Service participation in this operation focused primarily on initial violations ranging from resource damage, sanitation violations, illegal motor vehicle use, and operating a commercial activity on national forests without permits. During 2008 and 2009, the Forest Service began seeing a trend of illegal activities associated with the use of national forests. Our officers witnessed and members of the public reported activities that indicated increased activities of illegal baiting, illegal taking of black bear, and illegal commercial outfitting of hunting services. These reported violations were occurring on federal, state, and private lands crossing multiple jurisdictions. These complex jurisdictional issues, combined with the limited investigative resources and officer safety concerns, led the Forest Service to contact the other impacted agencies. The purpose was to combine intelligence as well as plan a potential covert operation to surface the violations within respective jurisdictions. These coordinated efforts led to the formulation of the Operation Something Bruin. From 2009 through 2013, this operation was managed jointly, but each respective agency had supervision and oversight of their assigned resources. As a result of the investigation by the Forest Service, 18 individuals were convicted of various crimes, including operating a commercial activity on national forest without a permit, illegal placement of bait on national forest with intent to hunt bear, illegal hunting of bear on national forest land, and 3 more key points that I would like to make. In the course of these prosecutions, the court considered and denied challenges to federal jurisdiction, while multiple juries convicted defendants alleging entrapment. One important aspect in the planning of this undercover operation was the joint decision by all agencies, including the Department of Justice, that if an agent was put in a position that would otherwise expose his or her cover, the taking of game was authorized. The Forest Service spent a total of about $70,000 related to Operation Something Bruin over a 5-year period. These are the facts, but there's one more story of Operation Something Bruin I want to conclude with. Forest Service law enforcement officers and agents support our mission delivery each and every day. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize them this morning for their service. These officers work long hours, usually at odd times and over holiday weekends, so the rest of us can safely enjoy our national forests and other public lands. This service comes at a cost to these officers and their families, and in some cases with great, tremendous sacrifice. So I want to take a moment here today to make sure that we honor the service of those who protect our public lands and the visitors who enjoy them. To conclude with, I would emphasize once again that the protection of wildlife on national forests is a shared responsibility. The Forest Service, we are committed to doing our part to ensure that citizens have sustainable wildlife populations for the public to enjoy for generations to come. It concludes my comments. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Took. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the service of tremendous law enforcement officers of the U.S. Forest Service. I've had the unfortunate necessity to be at a funeral of a U.S. Forest Service law enforcement officer who was fighting courageously in my district and lost his life. And so it does not go unnoticed the sacrifice, not only the ultimate sacrifice that he and his family paid, but the daily sacrifice, the missing birthdays and anniversaries and others as they work. So this hearing in no way and in no shape or fashion is designed to impugn the service of so many great folks from this thing. Mr. Myers, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Meadows and members of the subcommittee, thank you for bringing your important work directly to the people of Western North Carolina, and for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to discuss our role in Operation Something Bruin. The Wildlife Commission's primary mission is to conserve North Carolina's wildlife resources and their habitats and provide programs and opportunities that allow hunters, anglers, boaters, and other outdoor enthusiasts to enjoy wildlife associated recreation. That mission is derived from our agency's statutory purpose, which includes protection of North Carolina's wildlife resources and administering the laws relating to those resources. Those resources are held in trust by the state for the benefit of the public, and individuals may only take them within the constraints of law and regulation. To accomplish the law enforcement elements of our mission, we use a multifaceted approach, which includes focused education, public awareness campaigns, and proactive law enforcement. Together, these elements of conservation law enforcement encourage ethical conduct by sportsmen, assure proper conditions for scientific management of our wildlife resources, and secure significant public benefit from those resources. The achievements resulting from scientific wildlife management in North America over the past century have been astounding. In North Carolina, restored populations of black bear, wild turkey, and white-tailed deer are just a few examples of those long-term achievements. Conservation law enforcement is fundamental to that success. Information provided to me indicates the U.S. Forest Service initiated Operation Something Bruin in late 2009, and based on my records, I was first informed of the operation in early 2011, when our law enforcement division chief requested authorization to actively assist in the investigation, which was funded and led by the U.S. Forest Service. The Wildlife Commission values our partnerships and strong working relationships with local, state, and federal agencies, including law enforcement and public safety agencies. We strive to operate effectively and efficiently by working with those partners to reduce duplication of effort and to leverage our resources for mission accomplishment. To that end, we provided one undercover officer, as well as officers who assisted in the execution of search warrants. In a letter dated to me May 21st, 2015, from the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, references were made to media reports citing questionable tactics used in the operation, including allegations of entrapment. Entrapment is a complete defense to a crime, and to the extent that any defendant believed he or she was entrapped, the defendant could bring that forward in court. Based on my understanding, at least one defendant did raise that defense, and the issue was determined by a jury. That letter also referenced concerns associated with the circumstances under which wildlife was taken by an undercover officer. There is no dispute that wildlife was taken during this operation, and it is my understanding that on at least one occasion, Wildlife Commission Officer Chad Arnold testified as to the circumstances. When officers work in an undercover capacity, there are times when they may need to take specific action, including the taking of wildlife resources, in order to maintain their cover or their safety. In addition, the potential long-term resource benefits that accrue from enforcing our wildlife laws, including the limited taking of resources, can protect far more wildlife resources than those taken in an undercover capacity. That letter also requested information related to charges or convictions, as well as costs associated with the operation. It is my understanding that the prosecuting attorneys reviewed all violations prior to charges being filed. It is also my understanding that after charges were filed, some charges were dismissed, many of which reference the Pettit Doctrine, which limits and prioritizes prosecutions if overlapping jurisdiction exists. In some cases, plea deals were agreed upon in which a defendant pled guilty to some charges in exchange for the dismissal of others. The decisions regarding pretrial disposition of charges rest with the prosecuting attorney's office. There have been wide-ranging media reports on the cost of Operation Something Bruin, including reports that the operation cost several $1 million. Based on review by my office, it is my understanding that the direct costs to the Wildlife Resources Commission were less than $12,000. This figure does not include salary costs, which are paid regardless of the work performed while on duty. In closing, I've worked for the Wildlife Commission for the past 24 years, and it is truly an honor and privilege every day to work among staff who exhibit the highest level of professionalism and dedication to resource conservation. I greatly value and respect the important responsibilities of our law enforcement officers, just as I value and respect the important work that you are doing here today. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I'll gladly take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Thank you for your service. Mr. Adams.
Chairman Meadows, Congressman Collins, and Congressman Duncan, thank you for the invitation to this hearing and for allowing transparency and oversight on behalf of all citizens of the United States. Additionally, coming to the people only shows care and concern to ensure all parties are equally represented. The Department of Natural Resources supports legal and ethical hunting under fair chase conditions. The agency is charged with managing wildlife populations under the public trust doctrine for all citizens of Georgia. Law enforcement is a critical component in ensuring that wildlife populations are conserved for present and future generations. Today I will discuss the role and scope of involvement of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources in the multi-state, multi-agency Operation Something Bruin. In 2009, the Law Enforcement Investigative Unit of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources was contacted by the U.S. Forest Service and requested to participate in an undercover operation that would target unknown individuals believed to be participating in illegal hunting activities in remote areas of the southern Appalachian Mountains. Illegal bear hunting, illegal guiding on federal property, hunting out of season in enclosed areas, illegal sale of black bears, parts, and Lacey Act violations were all types of violations citizen complaints and fragmented information given to officers over several years. Additionally, hunters have begun to use advanced radios, GPS devices, and electronic tracking systems, making enforcement and documentation of violations more difficult. Research previously conducted showed that less than 10% of witnessed wildlife crimes were reported, further hampering enforcement efforts. Georgia agreed to participate in the operation by furnishing one trained officer during hunting season for the duration of the operation. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as U.S. Forest Service, agreed to provide needed supervisory structure, support agents, and undercover agents. It was also decided that the undercover portion of the operation would last no more than 3 years. Supervisors from the Georgia DNR maintained contact with an undercover officer from Georgia while he was attached to the operation. Authority for the operation and officers came under a long-standing memorandum of agreement with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that was last updated in 2006. During this operation, there were 2 black bears that were taken in Georgia. These 2 were taken by an undercover officer in 2011. Each of the harvests were made while the officer was in the role as a hunter, being guided, on duty, and as an official act. In addition, both instances were thoroughly documented in writing in a report of investigation and reported as soon as practical to operation supervision. During the 2011 hunting season, the Georgia DNR records showed that 690 bears harvested by hunters in Georgia, with 529 coming from the mountain bear population. During the 2013 hunting season, agencies that were participating in Operation Summit and Bruin made the decision to end all covert operations and begin the closeout phase of the operation. Beginning in December 2013 and continuing until February 2014, when the initial arrest warrants were served, several tasks were completed by Georgia DNR officers and supervisors that provided multiple layers of oversight on all charges taken by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. A small number of supervisors who were not aware of the operation were briefed on the operation and directed to review all reports of investigation that involved state charges that occurred in Georgia over the course of the operation. Their charge was to review the report of investigation, list out possible violations, review them to make sure that they were in compliance with the law enforcement concept policy, confirm all elements of the crime were met, they were not duplicative, and not minor administrative infractions. After the list of possible charges were reduced to a list that met the previously stated criteria, supervisors of Georgia DNR met with prosecutors in each judicial circuit where charges were being made and briefed, as well as received approval to move forward in the intent to prosecute the defendants on the crimes outlined in the briefings. After the briefings were held, officers secured arrest warrants that were signed by judges for each defendant and each charge. In addition, the media plan was coordinated to highlight the operation in an attempt to deter other violations. The media plan was to give an overview of the operation and discuss a number of types of charges made. This number continued to decrease as the charges went through the previously mentioned vetting and oversight process. On the first day of the takedown phase, Georgia officers, along with law enforcement officers from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Forest Service, made contact with 3 suspects identified in the operation. Walt Stansel, Kel Stansel, and Jerry Parker were all contacted at their residence during early afternoon hours on the first day. All were given copies of the search warrant and arrest warrants and the state charges, and the search process was explained to each by a Georgia DNR officer. Georgia DNR has issued and required the use of body-worn recording devices since 2007. The encounters during the takedown phase of all Georgia defendants were recording using these devices, and all recordings have been submitted to the committee as requested. Each video of these encounters depicts professional, polite, and courteous officers who complete their jobs but treat the defendants and their personal property with respect. I was at Walt Stansel's residence for a period of time during his arrest and the search of his residence. When the attorney, Mr. Stockton, came to the residence, he was allowed to speak privately with Mr. Stansel, and while at the residence, Mr. Stockton commented to Mr. Stansel in my presence that other officers that he appreciated how we were conducting the arrest and searches, and they should be thankful that we were being respectful of their belongings. He'd never seen a search warrant executed that way, and that officers normally dump belongings on the ground and have little respect for personal property. I told him that's not how the agency did things, and not what we saw from our officers. The remaining search warrants and arrest of the defendants in Georgia were executed over the next 2 days without incidents. In closing, thank you for the opportunity to come and testify in front of the committee, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. I would like to highlight the fact that your agency has been extremely cooperative with this committee in terms of the document requests and everything that we've asked for, you've been willing to provide. And in a time where sometimes that is difficult to do, I just want to say thank you on behalf of the committee. We've got unbelievable staff on committee, and it makes their job much easier. Additionally, Mr. Myers, thank you. You have agreed to provide documents on a rolling basis. We look forward to getting those completed documents. But you too have been very cooperative in those. And that's what it's all about. It's about transparency. It's about restoring trust in government. And when we're open and transparent, we know that the rule of law is here. I think it's important that the 9-year-old girl that we heard about in this very first panel, that she understands that law enforcement officers are people that she can depend on and trust. And in an environment where a lot of the narrative is not that, your actions, Mr. Adams, and those of your fellow officers seek to restore it. I just want to say thank you. The gentleman from Georgia is going to have to get out. He has made a long trip down, and there is not a straight road between here and there. And so I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, and then he will.
Thank you for those. Thank you for allowing me here. I just want to say thanks to the good folks in this great district from your representation of them, which is outstanding in D.C. for their turnout today on this issue is really amazing. And I think I'll come out here for all hearings. If I can sit here and look out the window, I'd probably have a hard time, but it's just absolutely beautiful. So thanks for being part. One of the issues that I have, and I've served on the oversight and government forum, still maintain a membership there. I just am not there right now, but I do serve on the judiciary. And judiciary has primary oversight of the Department of Justice. And unfortunately, especially over the last few years, this Department of Justice has chosen not to be transparent, has chose to be, at times, to obfuscate, to give half answers. I have had my run-ins with the former Attorney General, thank you goodness, former Attorney General. I was hopeful of the new Attorney General to put in a new order of openness, but undoubtedly the Department of Justice, wanting to claim that there are still ongoing criminal cases, decides not to come and be transparent about simple things such as the operating agreement between North Carolina and the federal fish law. Because if they were here, but oops, they're not, they could then talk to me about the mutual consideration or consultation in the North Carolina agreement with federal and state prosecutors. I would love to ask them that question. I guess they're too busy. I would love to ask them if they actually consulted and decided, as we heard in the first panel, about where they were going to charge and how they were going to charge. What was the decisions made? Why are we moving cases, to that prosecutorial discretion? Again, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to ask those questions, but again, our Department of Justice decides to hide behind procedural when they were not asking questions about cases. I just want to know about their thinking. Again, there's a TV show called Law and Order. My wife loves it. I tolerate it. Because it really conduces our criminal justice system into really too often bumper sticker answers. But it makes a great statement at the beginning. It says this is a story about the men who enforce the laws and the folk and the men and ladies who enforce and the ones who prosecute. Today we have before us those who enforce, who put their lives on the line, who represent those who do that, and is a son of one who watched his dad go out, not knowing if he would come home. And sometimes when he came home, bloody, 20 uniform, I understand that. I'm just highly disappointed that DOJ chose again to hide. I've seen this I've seen it in judiciary all the time. It is just sad. But let me get to a few things here. One, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, I served in the State House with your commissioner, Mark, telling him I'm sad that he did not make the long winding road up here. I'll have to see him about that later, and also Colonel Henderson as well. Give my best. Your amount of cooperation, the chairman said, has been very cooperative with this committee, and also you gave me a statistic. How much data have y'all turned over to the committee?
40 gigabytes of data.
40 gigabytes.
It's a challenge to figure out how to get it there on time.
I can imagine. But it was turned over, and I think one of the things that also listed some costs. What are some of the cost estimates, or what cost? Because there's been a lot of numbers thrown around. We just heard 10,000. Many wasn't sure about that, but I was just, from Georgia's perspective, cost on this operation.
There were no direct costs related to the operation, other than salary of an undercover officer that was involved and limited supervisory oversight. The takedown phase, there was a small amount of travel involved. This is a guess, probably less than $5,000, and that's a high estimate.
Okay. One of the things that's also been brought up here is this cooperative agreement issue. And I want to highlight something here because we do have a cooperative agreement in North Carolina, a different agreement, if you would. Your contention is, and I'm assuming from other issues that you have before, that you're operating under the 2007 agreement, I believe, or 2006 agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Are there, from what you know of this agreement, and you may not, and if you don't, that's fine, but maybe Forrester could answer this, are there any applicable differences between this agreement that would have necessitated the need for this agreement as opposed to what Georgia is operating under and has been operating under? Mr. Adams first, and if you would care to comment on it.
I'm not familiar with the North Carolina agreement, although I can speak to the Georgia agreement. The Georgia agreement, which is signed between the director of our agency, or commissioner, and the special agent in charge of the Southeast region, I hope I got that term correct, grants authority to rangers with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources who have passed the field training status to enforce several federal statutes such as the Lacey Act, CITES, Migratory Bird Treaty, ESA, Endangered Species Act, and other things. The agreement also provides deputization of federal officers as Georgia conservation officers, so it's a dual back and forth.
So they can't come in.
That is correct.
And so, and before I go to St. John's, I want your you operated, even though it has been brought up that there's not an agreement with Georgia per se in this, you're under, and all of your agreements operate off of that one and cover this completely, correct?
That's correct. We consulted with the Council of Georgia DNR, and we felt like that the long-standing MOU, which was last updated in 2006, prior to this operation's inception, would cover our officers and the performance of their duties.
Just saying, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes. With one clarification, the agreement is signed by our Chief of Law Enforcement, our headquarters, and the regional director.
Okay. But as far as the operational aspects of this, because there has been some confusion, why was this signed, why did Georgia not? But as far as the operational perspective, what Georgia operated under and because of North Carolina, maybe Mr. Myers, you want to say, why did y'all sign a new agreement, or did y'all not have a regional memorandum of understanding?
Congressman, we are operating under an agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from 2006. It's much like the agreement that the state of Georgia has, except in North Carolina we don't have the reciprocity where the federal agency can enforce the state laws.
Okay, so that's why you felt the need to have had this other agreement.
Well, the other agreement with the Forest Service, there's the agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service that gave our officer authority out of state.
Right.
The agreement with the Forest Service established the relationship on this operation relative to administrative costs and other things.
I'm going to wrap up here because I appreciate the chairman's indulgence and the gentleman from South Carolina as well. I think one thing that was brought up by the chair in this, and it goes back to something that has been in the news lately. There's a lot of good that can come from body cameras. There's a lot of questions still out there. You know, how you use them, how you're not using them, when they're off, when they're not. But I think this is an example that could be used because even the attorney for the family and the family itself, when you were able to show that and the respect and treatment, even in a very difficult situation for all involved, not just the officer, but also the families involved, I think showed that there was a way to do that. And I'm proud of Georgia for doing that and the way it was handled and your turning over. I appreciate the hard work involved in this. Nobody wants to do it. I grew up hunting. I mean, it's just, you do it the right way. But also the federal government has to be very much aware of the perception that many times occurs in these kind of operations when there feels like there was, as was said earlier, there was entrapment in this defense, a very legal definition of entrapment. And, that's, I think, what is concerning to many. So I think there's a lot of questions raised here. I'll go back to what I started with, what your work was doing. I appreciate you being willing to sit at this panel and testify. And I'm sure DOJ is listening somewhere. I'm not on their best list, and I'm not making it again today. But again, I wish DOJ would share the same transparency issues that members of Congress do and that you show here today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I do excuse myself. I appreciate y'all.
I thank the gentleman. The North Georgia is very fortunate to have you representing them, and I thank you for taking the time away from your family to come here and hopefully allow for greater transparency. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, which, by the way, is the vice chair of the Sportsman's Caucus. So he is very familiar with a number of these things. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and avid outdoorsman, love to hunt and fish and travel and do that. And just trying to get my head wrapped around the impetus for Operation Something Bruin. So, Mr. Santiago, how did this originate? Who contacted who, and how did all this begin?
Yeah, basically in years prior to the investigation, citizens and hunters in Tennessee and North Carolina reported illegal bear hunting to state wildlife officers. And acting on these reports, the service, U.S. Forest Service, the Georgia DNR, and North Carolina Wildlife Resources initiated this investigation basically from the concerns of citizens and hunters.
So let me go to North Carolina, Mr. Meyer, because I don't think you were the executive director then, when you answered this. So North Carolina was seeing, and Georgia were seeing large amounts of baiting activity, illegal bear pens, we call them pens in South Carolina, trespass, all these activities and transport. You were apprehending or uncovering gallbladders that were being prepared to ship or were crossing state lines. You were hearing from the FBI that these gallbladders were being apprehended or confiscated in other states as they're going, or ports going out of the country. Is that what you're telling me?
Congressman, based on my information, the United States Forest Service began getting reports in 2009, and when this project was initiated, this operation. And our colonel came to me in early 2011 after he had attended a meeting and was briefed on the situation. And in that meeting, as my understanding is, there was enough compelling information that he felt it would be beneficial for the Wildlife Resources Commission.
Were these anonymous tips, or were these actually interviews that you had someone come in and they interviewed and they told you specific instances of illegal harvest, of baiting, of gallbladder sales, and all that?
I do not know the source of the information.
Because anybody can call anonymously in, and I would believe that there are a lot of people out there, based on my history in the state legislature on the committee that handle all our DNR wildlife issues. There are people out there that do not want bears killed, period. And they will raise allegations at the drop of a hat to stop it from happening. And so if this was an anonymous tip line, that's one thing. If you went out and interviewed people that were making these allegations and began an initial investigation from the state wildlife offices that uncovered an enormous activity in North Carolina, and Western North Carolina, and Georgia, and South Carolina, is that what you're telling me? That's what I'm asking.
This operation was not initiated by the state of North Carolina.
Georgia?
I guess a couple of things is in Georgia, just to clarify a little earlier testimony, bear feeding of wildlife is legal in Georgia. It's when you introduce gunpowder that it becomes a crime. The exception to that, however, is bears. There's a specific statute, it's OCGA 27-3-27, that it makes it illegal to place feed to congregate bear populations. Bears can be habituated to become dependent upon humans. It causes them to be problem bears, and problem bears generally become dead bears. So there is a specific state law, absent of hunting, that prevents the congregation of black bear populations, which was an admitted activity that was being done by one of the defendants. We had officers who would, for many years, encounter people who were training dogs. And that was legal. There was a legal training season. There was convenience store talk and things like that. Anecdotal evidence that there was more than training occurring sometimes. Training is a legal activity. We certainly support it. It's something we could do. Additionally, most of the areas that we're talking about are remote areas that are between western North Carolina and northeast Georgia.
Can I ask you
believe certain times of the year it is not legal to hunt bears with dogs in North Georgia. It's legal in South Georgia. It is not legal for the mountain population of black bears in Georgia. So there was a lot of anecdotal talk that our officers in the area, uniformed officers, heard. People being guided, training being used as a guise for hunting, and we heard that. Undercover officers during the course of this operation heard defendants say, you don't have a gun, you're not hunting, and I'm paraphrasing here. So we did feel like there was some activity, but we were contacted by the U.S. Forest Service to start this operation.
U.S. Forest Service, were y'all contacted? I mean, I know you've got a limited number of officers and whatnot that are out there. Were you contacted by outside sources based on testimony? That's how this thing began. And did you verify those outside sources? Did y'all investigate, interrogate, question, whatever?
So the Forest Service contacted the other federal and state agencies, and our participation, it was initially focused on different violations, some similar to what's already been mentioned, violations ranging from resource damage, sanitation violations, illegal motor vehicle use, and then operating a commercial activity on the National Forest without a permit. So as our officers began to investigate that, they had their own observations as well as reports from the public, from citizens, about other crimes, other violations that were uncovered, such as illegal baiting of bear, taking a black bear during the closed season, and then again the commercial sale of black bear parts. And so in 2009, those contacts were made to the other agencies, and the agencies came together to share information and look at the situation as a whole.
So there were allegations that black bear parts were being sold across state lines. What evidence was there? Were these being seized at airports, being seized, shipped by UPS? Were these being seized at ports on cargo ships going out? I mean, what evidence was there?
I don't have the specific evidence. I just know that there were reports of that, and that's what they uncovered during their investigation.
I won't go to the next hearsay. And so let me shift gears here a little bit. Does U.S. Forest Service permit commercial activity hunting guides? I'm talking about rafting on the map. Does the U.S. Forest Service permit hunting guides on U.S. Forest Service property in western North Carolina and North Georgia?
Yes, we have operator and guide permits on multiple national forests across the country. We do have legal outfitting and hunting guide permits.
Okay. Is most of the property considered game management area? Is it open to public hunting?
All of the national forests in North Carolina are in what's called game lands areas. All of the lands here in North Carolina.
Okay. Are the permits restricted? It's just my application. The permit's restricted. If I'm an outfitter and I want to take folks hunting and I get a commercial operator's permit as an outfitter from U.S. Forest Service, am I restricted to a certain area?
The permits, I think, vary. It depends on what the applicant's asking for. Some of them may request certain parts of the forest. Some of them may request the entire park. I don't have the specific details on the ones that we have.
I know out west, if you're a guide, you're permitted. You're usually permitted for use days on certain areas, and you're restricted to those use days in those areas.
Yeah, and I think some of them may be for certain time frames, and others different time frames.
If you suspect illegal guiding activity, are you investigating that? You're going out and meeting with the people that were supposedly taken hunting?
I would say that our officers probably did it a variety of ways, but yes, they could do that.
Are these permits for just big game, or do you have to issue permits for people doing any commercial guiding for turkey hunts, trout fishing, that sort of thing?
It would be for whatever is legally be legally hunted.
So how many of the cases involved illegal commercial activity on U.S. Forest Service property with regard to Operation Something?
I don't have the specific numbers. I know we brought forward 24 individuals. There were 18 that were charged and convicted. And there were also 10 arrests for breaking the federal laws, rules, and regulations. And some of those did include operating a commercial operation without a permit.
Trying to get my head around jurisdiction on federal and state. Who owns the wildlife that's out there? Who controls it? Is that the state of North Carolina, or is that federal?
On federal lands, on national forests, we have concurrent jurisdiction with the states to enforce wildlife laws on those lands.
So, can North Carolina wildlife officers conduct their normal activities on U.S. Forest Service property?
We have concurrent jurisdiction.
I think this next question I have is probably more for the Justice Department, but I'm curious about the directive to deny probation. Were any of you involved in that directive?
And in your first part, I'm sorry, sir. The first part of your question.
Were any of you involved in the directive in terms of deny probation? Were you aware of it? Were you involved in it?
That was determined by the prosecutors, if I'm understanding your question.
Yeah. There was an email that was provided to the committee that apparently directs the prosecutors to deny probation to some of these defendants, assuming they were convicted.
Yes, sir, that was totally their decision.
How about change of jurisdiction from a local state court to a federal magistrate?
Totally their decision.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, you concur?
Yes.
Justice Department. How do you respond to the allegation of property damage for seized items? I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Santiago.
Through the process of the search warrants, the service didn't confiscate any items.
Has there been a specific investigation into the allegations of the defendants who had property seized as to whether that property was damaged by elements of the Fish and Wildlife Service or North Carolina and Georgia law enforcement?
I have no knowledge of any allegations of damage.
If the gentleman, you
Allegations are there.
well, Mr. Took, are you aware of anything?
In the search warrants and the property that was seized, all these warrants were approved by judges. They were all reviewed by them, our officers.
That wasn't the question. That's a good answer to a question that wasn't asked, but that wasn't the question. And you talk about seizing of property. Are you aware of any improper seizing of property or improper holding of property
And resulting damage?
And resulting damage?
Yes, sir. They followed the federal rules of evidence in both seizing it, taking care of it, and returning it. What's been returned? I'm not aware of it. Not aware of any
The
damage.
committee has been made aware of that, and the defendants have raised this issue. Whether they've raised it with North Carolina, Georgia, or the feds, I'm not sure. But the issue's been raised, or otherwise I wouldn't know about it. So, what is the process for the people that are here? What is the process for some sort of either reimbursement or, and I'm sorry, from the federal government or the local law enforcement for damage to items seized? What sort of recourse do they have? So what would be the step? If one of these folks that are out here that may or may not be defendants in these cases that had items seized that were damaged, what would be their recourse? What would the process be? Because they're wondering if an antler was sawed off. I mean, you can't replace, that's a trophy. You can't replace that. Why in the world was it sawed off? What's the ramifications or what is their recourse rather for dealing with that? Mr. Santiago.
Yeah, there's a tort claim process. The tort claim process where subject can file a complaint about the damages. And that's
So you're saying they need to sue the federal government?
well, there's a process for it.
But that doesn't normally end well. Yeah. And
Not
so
for the defendants.
not for the, yeah. And so is that what you're saying? Is that's your answer if you did it improperly?
I'm not referring to this particular investigation, but in circumstances where there's some claims about damages, that's the way that we normally handle those claims.
Mr. Myers, if North Carolina was involved in the I want to say illegal seizing because there's an investigation going on, items that were part of our wildlife trophies and other things probably would be seized and be justified, but if they were damaged, what is the recourse for the people? What would be the process? Who would they talk to within North Carolina DNR for that? Because, yes, sir.
Well, we would be contacted, and we have, I will say, preface this, there is ongoing litigation relative to a tort claim, and so I would say that the process would be to contact us and advise them of the tort claim process, which they can file a tort claim, and there has been one filed in North Carolina. I will also say that we were not the custodians of evidence in Operation Something.
I don't know if Georgia was involved in any of that, sir.
I think we took very few things. For example, we had a computer person come in and we imaged hard drives instead of taking things. And our process for collecting evidence like that is to photograph it, document it, and to say what condition it's in. Again, in this operation, we were not the custodians. However, we may have seized some things pursuant to the search warrant. And if we have not been made aware of any complaints or anything from Georgia that was taken, and it would take a simple phone call, probably follow up with a letter saying what was damaged. We would probably internally look at evidence, photographs to make sure that it was not in that, I guess, that state before we got it, and then we would move forward. That would be how we handle it. We have not received any complaints of anything being damaged in Georgia.
They would be rightfully upset I would be upset if one of my trophies had been damaged, and especially if if the case was adjudicated and I was found not guilty, and I would return my seized items and they're damaged, I'm going to be upset. And so are you gentlemen willing to provide to the audience in some shape, form, or fashion, maybe through the committee, some sort of steps of recourse on who they can contact? Not in a negative way, and I appeal to the people that have had their items damaged. There is a process. Let's get to that process for some sort of recourse, short of suing the federal government, which I think is obtuse. So let's try to work through this, because the committee has been provided evidence that, or at least allegations that things have been damaged. Mr. Chairman, this has been a good hearing. I'll yield to you. I may have some more questions as I think through this. I yield back.
So let me go ahead and follow up on that question. Mr. Took, where were you the custodian of all the seized equipment?
I don't know if we were.
It was the U.S. Forest Service, not you personally. I didn't say it was in your garage. So.
I don't know if we were of all of it. I know we did have evidence that we seized. I think some of it's even been returned. And they followed this federal rules of evidence as a process and constantly work with the Justice Department in all phases of executing that.
I want to give, where was it held?
I'm not sure where we...
So you don't know where you held it?
No, sir.
Was it in a conditioned space?
Pardon?
Was it in a conditioned space? Because one thing that's for sure, if it wasn't, it will mildew in western North Carolina.
Whatever is required in that federal rules of evidence is what our officers follow.
All right, so how do you respond, since you're the custodian, to the fact that there was damage to some of the items? Is that true or not? Did you take pictures before?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you take pictures before?
I'm not sure. Whatever the steps they were supposed to follow, we looked into.
You've got counsel here. Did you take pictures before, where you have a before and after? Yes or no?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Okay. Let me go on a little bit further, because this is extremely troubling. I understand that you still have stuff in. Somebody mentioned that you still have stuff that you're keeping. in your custody right now?
I think we do, sir.
That it's important to your investigation, is that correct?
There are ongoing investigations.
I didn't ask. Is it critical to your investigation? I know there's ongoing investigations. Is what you're holding critical to your investigation, or are you just holding?
No, sir. What's being held, I would say, is important to the investigation.
So let me, I've complimented both state agencies on their response to this committee. Is there any particular reason why your response, Mr. Santiago, and yours, Mr. Took, is less than voluminous?
Yeah, we are still have some open aspect of the investigation.
I understand that. And are you saying, I got no documents from you? Are you saying that there is not one single document that you could have sent this committee that was not involved with an ongoing investigation?
Well, there's
Not one.
As far as you know, the department and the agency staff is in conversations about.
So you're going to release it? Okay, because let me tell you what I'm concerned about. I get 2 letters from 2 different agencies. Do y'all work in the same building? No, you don't. I mean, I know the answer. Do you work in the same building, Mr. Santiago? Do you, Mr. Took?
No, sir.
How can I get 2 letters with the exact same wording, except for one sentence, one day apart? How can I do that? If there's not a coordinated effort to make sure we didn't get information. How does that happen? Mr. Santiago?
I cannot answer that.
Mr. Took?
We know that the committee's requested documentation. I think we provided 1 or 2.
You provided 2 documents.
Okay.
Now, how many gigabytes did you provide, Georgia? 40 gigabytes, and you provided 2 documents?
Yes, sir.
Of one of which was just a list of descriptions of federal charges. Would you say that that is really trying to be open and transparent, Mr. Santiago?
We provided.
Yes or no? Is it open and transparent?
All I can say is that we have ongoing investigations and they're looking
All right,
at.
so let me, since you're going to respond the same way, let me ask it a little bit differently. Are you willing to commit here today to get to this committee the necessary documents that give the background, the process of where we are? Are you willing to commit to get those to the committee as long as they are not in an ongoing investigation of that particular individual? Can I have all the other documents? Mr. Santiago, are you willing to agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Took?
Yes, they're being reviewed, and as soon as those reviews are completed and people allow us to do that, yes. But there are ongoing investigations, and all these documents are being given a thorough review by the Department of Justice and others.
All right, so are they reviewing your confiscation of private property as well?
The documentation.
DOJ. DOJ, yeah, the documentation.
Prosecutors, yes.
Okay, all right. So let me, Mr. Santiago, your opening testimony was interesting because you said that the reason that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife got involved is because that you saw bear populations decreasing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. How do you reconcile that with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission biologist who says that, quote, bear population is the highest it's been in 100 years, between 6,500 and 7,500. How do you reconcile that?
I believe what I said was that the poaching and the take of American black bear may affect the populations in the U.S.
Well, there's a lot of things that may happen, but you spent money based on what you said had happened. You know, I mean, you're really, because they're looking at extending the season on black bear, and you're saying that there's just such a devastating effect by this poaching ring that you got involved. How do you reconcile those two?
Again, what I said was that the continuing illegal take of American black bear may increase commercial demand of its part, eventually have a negative impact on its population.
Right, but I guess my question then, Mr. Santiago, is why look at Western North Carolina? Because that could be true all over the United States, and we're seeing an increase in population here. So why would you focus just on Western North Carolina? Is it because you had a successful poaching operation 20-something years ago that you found some guilty folks with there? Is that why you got involved in Western North Carolina?
Well, my guess is that this was the result of the information received from the field by the different investigating agencies.
I yield to the gentleman from South Carolina.
I want to ask, have y'all done a physical survey of the number of black bears in the Great Smoky Mountains area?
I have no information about that. I would have to go look
How are
into
you
it.
coming up with that determination that bear numbers are down?
That was in preparation for the testimony. I don't have that information.
The reason I ask that is, and this is a sidetrack for just a second, Mr. Chairman, is we continually see agents of the federal government using computer models to try to extrapolate and figure out how many numbers of black bear there may be, how many numbers of red snapper there may be. Guys in lab coats sitting up in a cubicle in Washington, D.C. somewhere, coming up with some sort of figure, that what they think, and not listening to the people out in the field, not listening to the state of North Carolina on the number of bears here, and not listening to people in the Gulf of Mexico on the number of red snapper that are actually being seen or caught, released, or taken on the boat for their bag limit. And these computer models are affecting what the American taxpayers can benefit from through recreational activities of sport hunting or sport fishing. And so this isn't directed at you, it is directed at your agency, and it's directed at NOAA, and it's directed at the other federal agencies, because we continually see this, Mr. Chairman, where they're using computer models and not actual data. I would ask, how did North Carolina come up with that number?
Congressman, we use harvest data on an annual basis to try to determine black bear population.
So actual data.
Actual data, using sightings, using trail cameras, using other things, right? Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thanks. All right. Look, two other things that before we finish up here, I need to get some clarity on. One has to do with this memo that was signed after federal and state agents got together. Now, there was an allegation made in the first panel that was signed after there was actually activity going on. Is that the case? Mr. Took, Mr. Something, either one of you.
So the memorandum of understanding that the Forest Service signed with the state of North Carolina was signed in February 2012.
Right.
And it's my understanding that we didn't have any search warrants executed or any arrest until about a year later, 2013. And
But were state and federal agents working together without an agreement, enter into conversations and hunts with other people? Now, search warrants is a different thing. The one is working together to build a case, but search warrants is a different question.
The operation could have went forward without this specific memorandum of understanding. It was just determined that...
Well, that disagrees with what Mr. Myers was saying earlier in his testimony. He said that y'all needed an agreement to work together, or what? I guess if you didn't need the agreement, why did you sign it in February? Maybe that's the way I need to ask it.
There was already existing agreements.
That's great. So if there's an existing agreement, why did you sign one in February? I mean, why would you need one in February if there's already an existing one? I'm confused.
Okay. So the the magnitude of the operation was increasing, and it was determined that this particular, with most of it focused on western North Carolina, but not all of it, that it would be helpful to make sure we're clear on roles and responsibilities, how information and intelligence would be coordinated. It was non-monetary, except for just, it was in there that the Forest Service could cover some incidental expenses like fuel of a state officer working on federal land. And so we thought that this particular MOU or agreement could be helpful to go through the
So the magnitude in that a week or 12 days prior, as was testified in the first panel, you found something and you said, well, we better go and get a memo of understanding because the magnitude is getting greater? Because that's what they're saying. It's 12 days after that you signed this agreement. Is that correct?
12 days after what?
After some type of, you heard Mr. McLean, he was talking about it, is basically some type of interaction on behalf of federal and state agents together, that then you went back and signed it.
I'm not aware of that specific incident, but that wasn't the.
So what your testimony here today is that you had an existing agreement, and that the February 2012 agreement was a clarifying agreement. Is that correct?
We have concurrent jurisdiction with the states on that.
You testified that already. I'm asking you a specific question.
Yes.
Is the document that you signed in February of 2012, was that a clarifying document to your previous memorandum of understanding?
Parts.
Or did you need it?
Parts of it were.
Oh, so it was new. Some parts of it were new.
Well, like the part about incidental expenses, that was.
Anything else new?
Most of the agreements are pretty common.
That's not what I asked. I said, you're answering good questions to questions good answers to questions I don't ask. And so here's what I'm asking you. What other parts of that memorandum were different?
More clarity around the roles and responsibilities for this specific operation.
So basically, you got some anonymous tips that said that you needed to have the federal government come in here and help Georgia and North Carolina do their job. Is that correct?
No, sir, it was not based on anonymous tips. It was also based on what our own officers.
Yeah, but I think Mr. Santiago and you both have said you got numerous phone calls. I wrote down numerous. How many is numerous?
I know that our officers got reports from the public. I don't know how many.
Okay, Mr. Santiago, you said numerous. How many are numerous?
I would have to check on that and see how many were.
So it may be 2?
I don't have the information.
Okay, so you're going to get that information, how many anonymous tips that you got? Will you all both agree to get that information to me?
If we have the information about how many contacts.
Oh, so you're saying that you think that you had anonymous tips. Either you got them and you documented it or you didn't.
I don't know if they were anonymous. I know that we got.
Oh, so you mean, okay, well, if you can let me know the number of tips that you got from the public and when you got them, and that would be very helpful. Are y'all both agreeing to do that?
If we can do that, sir, yes, we will do that.
All right. So let me come back to the camera. Who put the camera on private property? Who put the federal camera on private property?
I have no idea.
So you have no knowledge of a federal camera? Okay, Mr. Took, who put the camera on federal property?
I'm not exactly sure, but I know all of the tactics and operations were reviewed by supervisors in the Department of Justice.
Okay, so all those supervisors that sounds like a prepared answer to the question. So let me ask you this: who put the camera on private property? I mean, obviously there's a supervisor that was involved, so maybe the supervisor knows.
They could have, but I'm not aware that our officer
Oh, so it was just an allegation that, are you saying it was on federal property?
No, sir, I'm not saying.
So you're saying there wasn't a federal,
our officer.
there wasn't a federal camera involved?
No, sir, I'm not saying that there could have been a federal camera placed on private property. That would have been authorized under this operation.
So who did that?
I'm not totally sure, sir.
All right. Would that person have been trespassing? Did they get permission to go on federal property and leave a camera?
All of the Forest Service investigations started on national forest.
So they just lost their way and ended up on private property?
If that had went over on to other lands, other properties, our officers, like I said.
But according to testimony, they were a quarter of a mile away from federal land. That's what we heard in the first panel.
They could have been authorized to do so, sir, in this operation.
All right, so let me ask you, if that's the case, if they ended up on private land, how do we know with specificity that all these things actually happen on federal lands? If they inadvertently got on private land, how do we know that they were on federal land when it happened? Do you have specifics on where they were?
No, sir, I'm not saying that.
So your testimony here today is that you do not know whether it was on federal land or not?
I don't know for sure. I just know that all of the tactics and operations were approved, and that I know that our investigation started on national forest, and it could have went
but wouldn't that have a whole lot to do with the federal question in this particular issue? If it didn't happen on federal lands, how are they being prosecuted federally?
Well, for example, under the game lands, the that we have here in North Carolina, it allows for cooperative work at the state.
Yeah, but it would be a state issue. It would be a state question, not a federal question, unless they were selling bear parts.
They asked for our assistance on private lands or state lands. Under that, we could provide it at the same time under our concurrent jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction, which has already been ruled upon by federal jurisdiction and the courts, by multiple courts as well as a jury. Our officers would have had the jurisdiction and the authority to do that. And it began.
But not if you didn't know where you were.
I'm not saying we didn't know where they were, sir. I'm saying
so you knew where you were for prosecuting. You just didn't know where you were for the camera.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't specifically myself know exactly where they were, but I'm saying that our officers, I know that if they went on those lands, they knew where they were and they were following what they were supposed to.
All right, last question. How much of your $10,000 that you said that you spent, which I would like a better accounting of that, would you be glad to give me, this committee, a better accounting? You're saying the total cost was $10,000 to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife?
Less than $10,000.
Less than $10,000. How much of that less than $10,000 was paid to someone to guide your agent?
I would have to research that.
Was any of it?
I would have to research it.
So how would you know that it's less than $10,000 if you don't know the breakdown?
Because we, when we conduct the
So
investigation,
you're preparing for the testimony, you said, well, this is what it is.
we have undercover procedures and undercover accounts, and when we open investigations, we keep undercover books and track all the expenses on each investigation.
So did you pay people to take you hunting, your agent hunting?
I would have to review the record.
So you prepared for this testimony, you don't know the answer to that question?
No, I don't.
Okay, Mr. Took, do you know the answer to that question? How much of, quote, $70,000 was paid to folks to take them hunting?
I don't have that with me today, but we have receipts, itemized receipts and itemized accounting of all the $70,000 that was spent.
So when you hired these guys to take you, was it 1,000? Was it 5,000? Was it 100?
I don't know, sir. Out of the 70,000, 44,000 was spent just about all on vehicles expenses and equipment. And then in the latter phases of the operation, the other $26,000 was spent on travel expenses for officers to execute the search warrants. And
So 44 and 26.
70,000.
So then you didn't have any money left to pay them, the guys.
I'm not saying that there wasn't some of it spent.
I'm just saying the numbers are not adding up. Either you didn't pay them much, or they're very bad businessmen. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, since this was a pay-to-play kind of thing, it's troubling to me that we're looking at all of this and there's not the money there.
It'll be in the itemized accounts.
And when can we expect that, Mr. Todd?
I can't say for sure. That's
30 days enough time?
I can't say for sure, sir.
365 days, is that enough time?
I can't say for sure, but I know as soon as those reviews are completed and we're allowed to provide it, we will.
The gentleman from South Carolina, I'll let him either ask some questions or do his closing remarks if he might.
Mr. Chairman, I just have some closing remarks. First off, I want to thank all of you for your service to states and the federal government. I don't want anything to be construed. We're trying to get to the bottom of concerns of our constituents and our role as watchdogs of the federal government on this. And I know the questions were hard and they were put forth in a manner that seemed aggressive at times, but sometimes that's necessary. I do question the impetus and motives which led to this operation based on what I'm hearing and what I've seen and what I've read. I'm concerned about the federal question and the ultimate decision to prosecute these cases in federal magistrate court. I'm worried about and very concerned about the issue that Mr. Collins raised about federal agents without probable cause and going through the due process of getting a warrant actually got on private property to investigate this. I'm concerned about the directive to limit and or deny the defendants the right to probation or any recourses that may be available to most people when they're facing prosecution. And I'm concerned that the Lacey Act was used for justification of this operation without hard evidence. Y'all have not been able to give me any hard evidence. And so I'm concerned that there were possibly allegations made by outside parties or groups to the taking, harvesting of black bear, and that those allegations may not have been followed up on to warrant an investigation of this nature and of this scope. And so I want to thank the chairman for continuing to delve into this. I think it's the right thing to do because I think this was a very large operation that happened in North Carolina, and there were some, I think, some very egregious violations of folks here in your state. So with that, I will back.
Well, I thank you. I think each one of you, the questions that I've asked today have been hard, but I can tell you that they pale in comparison to the questions that I've gotten by email, phone call. I face these people in the grocery store. And time again, I've been asked, well, what are you going to do about it? I mean, why does my 9-year-old daughter have to worry about the kind of treatment that they've got? Now, I say that because I have great respect for my law enforcement friends all over the place. And I can look back and see the sheriff. He's a gentleman that has prayed with me and for me and vice versa, and there is no one that I respect more than my law enforcement guys. At the same time, when we allow the federal government, and that's where I'm coming to this, when we allow the federal government to come in and at times not be the best custodian of personal property, of allowing some of these things to go on the allegations that I've heard, they're troubling. But the biggest issue that I think I have with this may not pertain to any of you here. Mr. McClain talked about it early on in his opening testimony. When we allow the stacking of misdemeanor offenses on what we would believe you know, 5 months in jail for having a hunting license expire for less than 48 hours is excessive. It's excessive in my book. I think it would be excessive in your book as well. Now, sometimes we can justify that saying, well, we pleaded, and, you know, they were guilty of other things. That's not up to a prosecutor to make that decision. It's up to a jury to make that decision. And when we stop that very fundamental foundational principle within our Constitution, it is troubling to me. And so I can tell you that the gentleman from South Carolina and I talked about that in terms of these particular offenses and the way they were stacked. We plan to address that. Coming back, I want to, you know, Western North Carolina is a beautiful place. And for all those that are listening to think that I'm going to be soft on those who are violating crimes, you have come to the wrong person. I want us to make sure that you adhere to the laws until the laws are changed. At the same time, I'm not going to allow my government to trample on the rights that are foundational and by many unalienable rights. I'm not going to allow that to happen, and I'm going to continue to ask the tough questions. Mr. Chook, I thank you for your willingness to be here today. I know this was not the most pleasurable thing. I will say I'm working with you on a number of other issues, and I want to compliment you on your willingness to engage us on those issues as well. And so, Mr. Santiago, I would encourage your testimony speechwriters to go back and check their facts, because your opening testimony doesn't match with the facts that we have here in North Carolina. And I'm troubled a little bit about a narrative that justifies this when indeed it may not be represented by the facts. So I appreciate your willingness to be here. We're going to continue to follow up and look at these issues. I thank you both for your commitment to give us the information to the committee. I want to thank the committee for their very hard work, for our law enforcement officers, and really the town of Waynesville for not only hosting us, but making a lot of these folks who have never been to Western North Carolina before feel welcome. I thank the gentleman from South Carolina, who is a dear friend. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.